Greetings. About 2 years ago, I did a video where I talked about how to be a professional speaker. Well, last week, I did a video asking people what they would want to hear from me in my quest to try to reach 1,000 subscribers. And my friend Eileen was the first one to respond. And what she said is she wanted more tips on how to be a professional speaker. So first, I'm going to link to that other article, and I'm going to tell you the points that I made in that article first. You can go and listen to it to get a little bit more depth on it so that you know that I'm not going to cover those same tips again. And it turns out I gave 8 tips, which I really didn't remember at the time, but I remember it now. So one of the tips I gave was rehearse a lot. I also said practice in front of a mirror. I said practice looking at your audience, which is basically walking around and making sure you look at both sides, because if you've got an audience, you want to make sure that you try to make eye contact with everybody. I said know your audience. So in other words, don't go in there saying things that may be to the wrong crowd, or don't try to be funny if it's a serious thing. Don't be too serious if it can be a little lighter. Don't go in wearing ripped jeans and a ripped t-shirt if they're dressed well. Don't overdress if you can help it, unless that's your comfort level. Create an outline. That's a suggestion I make because I always start with outlines. I put a lot of stuff on an outline so that then I can decide what points I want to talk about. Focus on 3 to 7 items. That makes it easier on you because as the presenter, you don't have to try to remember 15 or 20 different items unless you're doing an educational thing, in which case you'll have a PowerPoint to help you out. Tell a story. People remember stories better than they remember anything else. And finally, get over yourself if you're scared to speak in front of people, because you speak in front of people all the time. People are used to what you look like. People are used to what you sound like. Just go ahead and get it out of the way. So that's what I talked about last time. This time I'm going to offer 7 tips. And I know it's 7 tips. I may slip something in there without thinking about it, but it's 7 specific tips on public speaking. This way I get to change the title a little bit different than talking about how to be a professional speaker. This is 7 tips on public speaking. So here we go. The first one is wherever you're going to be presenting, get there early. I try to get to places at least an hour early, sometimes 90 minutes early, because I like to, 1, calm down. 2, I like to walk around. I like to basically see what the setup is. I want to see where, just how big it is, what kind of acoustics it has. Most of the time, I don't like to use a microphone. I learned projection in college because I was a music major. We had to learn how to project to sing. So I don't like using a mic if I don't have to. And it just gets to be kind of nice to have this comfort level. Sometimes people walk in 5 minutes before they're ready to present, and they're rushed, and they seem like they're just trying to figure out how they're supposed to do something. If you're going to be a professional, you want to act like you've done it before, even if it's your very first time. Next, figure out a way to connect with your audience. Now, if you're speaking locally, you have all kinds of things you should be able to use to connect with your audience. I'm in the Syracuse, New York area, so I can always talk about Syracuse Orange basketball or football. I can talk about different restaurants that are big in the area. I can talk about our snow. When I went to Nebraska, I wasn't really sure what I was going to talk about. But once I was there, I realized I'm in a place called Grand Island, and there ain't no island, and there's no water. So it gave me something to talk about. And I was able to get the audience kind of loose on that kind of thing, because even though there were a few people who lived in Grand Island, most of the other folks came in from other places. And I also talked about how flat their roads were. I mean, basically, I landed in Omaha, and I had to drive almost 2 hours to Grand Island. It was flat. We don't have flat in central New York. Matter of fact, most of New York State, you don't have a lot of flat. So that was a way of connecting with the audience, by letting them know something like that. When I spoke in Maine, I was able to open up by saying, I lived in Maine for 4.5 years in Limestone. And all the people there were aghast because only one person there had ever been that far north in the state. So it gave me an interesting connection, and it helped to break the ice. Let them know, yeah, I know a little bit about your state. I've been here. And now it turns out I've been places none of y'all have ever been. So it just opens things up. If you're going to use index cards, I mentioned the last time that basically I start with a few points, I memorize those points, and then I rehearse. Well, Sometimes people want to use something to help them stay on point, so they'll use index cards. I know that Toastmasters will teach some of their speakers that you can use index cards. However, I'm going to make a suggestion that if you use an index card, one, if you use multiple cards, only use two. Or use one card and number your points. The reason I mention that is a friend of mine gave a speech using index cards, and he had a bunch of index cards, and I'm sure he was writing all the different things he wanted to cover under each point. Well, what happened is early on, he got the order of his speech wrong, and the poor guy, he kind of fumbled through. He was still entertaining, but it took him a while to get his focus back because he realized that now he was out of order. He wanted to, keep going. He was shook up. You don't want to get shook up. Don't make it too complicated for yourself. Like I said, if you're going to use an index card, maybe you just have one card and write a few points down, or maybe just two cards. If you need some notes to yourself, make them like little short cryptic things just to get something in your mind so that you remember what it is that you want to talk about. Next point. Make sure you know your subject well. Don't be one of those people who read one book and now you're going to get up in front of everybody and try to act like you know everything about your topic. If you're called yourself an expert, try to be an expert or an authority or whatever you want to call yourself, because you're going to get people who are going to ask you questions that if you're not prepared, they're going to throw you for a loop. You're going to look like you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and it's going to fail. It's just not going to work. My suggestion would be don't talk about anything you don't know. But if you're a professional speaker, one of the things you learn is that there's a lot of things you know that you can actually turn into a topic on something else. For instance, this lady I met years ago named Laura Stack. She was actually professional. She was the president of the National Speakers Association at the time I met her. And what she does in her business is productivity. She's known as the Productivity Pro. You can find her anywhere. And what she said is that she can talk on any subject and relate it to productivity, because she knows productivity so well that if you wanted to talk about divorce, she can talk about it and productivity. You want to talk about sports, she can relate that to productivity. She's just that good. So that's a way of thinking about stuff. Like I've mentioned before when I talk about blogging, is that you can find almost anything to relate to blogging or writing whatsoever if you're creative. So here's the next thing. This is the fifth tip. You can make mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. I made a mistake once. It was really brief. It was a word that I wanted to use, and I wanted to use it, and I wanted to use it, and then I used a different word when I got to that point. And I didn't realize that I had made that mistake until later on because I had recorded it. And I said, oh, man. And I didn't get a chance to fix that. But if you say something during a speech or a presentation and you realize, well, okay, I messed that up, go back and fix it if you can. If you know that you did it, just fix it. If you're talking about something and suddenly you can't remember what it is, stop and tell folks, geez, I just forgot what that is. Y'all know Elton John. Elton John, back in the 80s, he was getting ready to do a major tour, and he stopped off in Saratoga Springs. And so I went to a concert, and here he is, he's doing, oh my God, what song was it? Tiny Dancer. He's doing Tiny Dancer, and he stops, and he looks out at the audience and says, I forgot the lyrics to my own song. And we all laughed, and he says, if you don't mind, I'm going to start the song over. He's Elton John. Yes, start the song over. He started the song over, he memorized the lyrics, and we all loved it anyway. And it was just a human moment. If Elton John forgot Tiny Dancer, one of his favorite songs, our favorite songs, then you're allowed to make a mistake. Number 6, don't answer questions that you haven't got to if you're planning on getting to it. And that happens sometimes, because what happens is a lot of people like to take questions. They'll say something, they'll say, okay, are there any questions? And truthfully, here's an extra point that you're just getting in here. If you can get away with answering questions as few times as possible during a presentation, do it. Try to wait to the end. However, if you're doing an educational session, you might talk about a few things, and then you stop and say, okay, are there any questions on what I just talked about? You need to be specific. But you're always going to have that person who's going to ask a question on something that you're looking to cover later on. It's better to say, okay, I'm going to be covering that later on. Let's wait till I get to that because I might answer your question. It's better to do it that way because that way it doesn't disturb the flow. You haven't really given anything away. If you give it away early, then by the time you get to it, say, okay, I already covered that. And sometimes it feels icky. I'm just going to say it. Yeah, icky is a professional word in this. I'm just going to tell you. So if that happens, like I said, it's better if you're doing just a regular presentation. Maybe you get halfway through it and say, okay, is there anything that I've talked about already that you'd like me to talk about more? Most of the time, you're going to get away with not having to do that. Just finish to the end. And here's number 7 or 8, if you want to take that other little suggestion I put in there as another one. Try to end with something that the folks can use or think about as the final thing. So, for instance, one of the things I sometimes like to do is I like to have a final 3 to 5 points, specific points that, okay, I've talked about all this other kind of stuff. Now, here are 5 specific things or 3 specific things. Or maybe you can end with one strong thing. For instance, maybe you're up there trying to sell something or you were talking about your business. And so maybe your call to action would be, okay, my name is so-and-so and this is what I do. Here's my phone number. I can help you do blank. That's a strong call to action. But it's easier if you're doing a professional thing to kind of give someone something that maybe they can take back with them to wherever they're going and start using that day. Maybe you're going to give something out and maybe you have it written down and you say, my final takeaway is such and such whatever, and I've given you this right on here and you can take that with you. If you're giving out handouts, you can have it on the handout. But make sure you give people a reason to remember you, give them something that you think they can use or that they should know about or just whatever. But it helps if you do that because you might need to come back to some of those people to either speak there again or to ask them for references that you can use to try to get another speaking engagement. So there you go. 7 or 8 public speaking tips on top of the ones I gave you in the previous video that I'm going to link to or I've already linked to so that now you got 15 or 16, depends on how you want to count it. Anyway, my name is Mitch Mitchell. Let me know what you think about these tips. Let me know if once you watch this video and you decide to watch the other video, if you still think there's something I haven't covered, because I can probably figure it out. Y'all take care. Have a great week. And thanks, Eileen Smith. Just, what's that thing called? And Eileen on Twitter. This woman knows a lot about YouTube. Y'all need to check her out. She's easy to find, Eileen Smith. I even did an interview with her. Y'all take care. Have a great week.